Coming up on this episode, Auckland City's amateurs prepare for the Club World Cup, Uzbekistan seal their World Cup debut, and Eritrea finally return to international football. Hello, and welcome to The Sweeper, the World Football podcast made in association with FIFA Plus. I'm Lee Wingate.
And I'm Paul Watson.
And in this episode, we have all the lowdown on the international window lined up for part 2. But first up, in part 1, we'll be previewing the FIFA Club World Cup with our usual focus on outsiders and underdogs. Paul, we've got 4 categories for this segment: bans and billboards, curious qualifications, prize money protests, and ultimate underdogs. Where are we going to start?
Well, we've got to start with ultimate underdogs, Lee. I'm surprised you even have to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it is the typical sweeper place to start this podcast. And who is our ultimate underdog for the FIFA Club World Cup, Paul?
Well, there's no doubt here. It's got to be Auckland City, hasn't it? Because they are the only part-time team taking part in this competition.
Yeah, the only club from Oceania as well. Oceania doesn't actually have any professional football clubs, does it? That's why there's been talks about setting up the OFC Professional League. So all of their players have day jobs, and the coach too.
Yeah, and that's the really crazy thing. They've gone from being the very big fish in Oceania's pond to very much the minnows in this competition. And this stark contrast between the lives their players lead and the lives of players from clubs like Bayern Munich.
Who are obviously fully professional, whereas the Auckland City players, you've got playmaker Dylan Manicum. He works on a building site. The forward Angus Kilcolly is a project manager for a painting company. And the defensive midfielder Mario Ilic, he's a salesman. He was actually unable to participate in a previous edition of the Club World Cup because he couldn't get time off of work. How mental is that?
It's crazy, isn't it? Do you think the boss thought it was all just a ruse? Like, it's like, Club World Cup? No.
Surely not.
Heard that one before.
I mean, if these players all have sort of 8 hours at their day job and they're training and playing matches as well, what does their schedule look like?
Well, I saw one of the players interviewed and he was really modest about it. He's like, it's pretty simple. You just wake up at 5 a.m, go to the gym, have your breakfast, go off to work by about 7:30 a.m, finish at 5 p.m, straight to training for 2 hours, home by 8:30 or 9, have your dinner, get yourself to bed because you've got to do it all over again. And I just looked at that and thought, oh, wow. How's anyone doing that?
That doesn't sound pretty simple to me. Also, it makes me wonder, when you go to a tournament like this, how much time off of work do you ask for? Because if you're backing yourself, do you ask all the way to the final, and I think it's like July the 13th, or do you just conservatively ask for the group stages off?
Yeah, and I remember this happening with one of the Samarinese teams in European competition, that the players had all asked for time off for their first qualification match, and they actually won it and got through, and none of them had asked for the second game off. So about 5 or 6 players just couldn't play because their bosses were like, you never asked for time off.
Yeah, I mean, it really does show you, because we're so used to like elite footballers and their special diets and their training regimes and all their commercial commitments, but this is just the other world of football, isn't it?
Yeah, and you'll have people, I'm sure some of the real big clubs in this competition will have auxiliary staff. They'll probably have a nutritionist who is being paid more than the rest of this whole squad, being paid. It's like the disparity between the resources they have at their disposal is so huge. And if we weren't already rooting for Auckland City, then yeah, we absolutely will be now.
Yeah, especially because they don't have their head coach with them in the USA, do they? What's up with that? It's Paul Poser. He's not travelling with the team.
He's not. No, he's had to pull out for personal reasons. So we hope everything's okay with him. And he actually is extraordinary because he's been juggling coaching the club with running a dentistry practice, which he does 4 days a week.
Yeah, I mean, that's mad. I mean, how do you even do that? So I presume he's like responsible for a lot of people that he's employing, and then he's also coaching the continental champions on the side.
Yeah, but crazily, not the only dentist coach. You probably remember this one, Lee, but Heimir Hallgrímsson, who's the current Ireland boss and former Iceland manager, was also a dentist. And I feel like there might even be one other, but I can't quite remember who it is.
Yeah, I remember. Wasn't he still working as a dentist part-time while coaching Iceland?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Because I remember when Iceland, famously upset England, that was something that was thrown, to add to the humiliation was, look, you've been beaten by a team who are coached by a dentist. And I thought this was sort of an exaggeration, but I think he genuinely was still a practicing dentist at that time.
If there's one statistic that's really going to indicate the gulf in class between the likes of Auckland City and their first group opponent, that's Bayern Munich, it's the squad market value. According to Transfermarkt, the squad market value of Auckland City is 5.2 million euros. That of Bayern Munich is 166 times larger.
That's incredible, isn't it? I mean, that they could Bayern Munich could afford to just buy Auckland City's squad just to not have to play them.
Yeah.
They could just buy them and tell them not to come to the field. It's a crazy thing, isn't it? They lose more money than that on photocopying probably. It's astonishing.
I feel like the term group of death gets bandied about a lot, but a group with Auckland City, then also Bayern, Benfica and Boca Juniors is by no means an easy one, is it? They didn't get helped out by the draw.
No, but also, what a dream scenario, right, for those players that, as you say, they'll go back to their day jobs, and these are people who will have played against some of the biggest clubs in the world of football. So a bit like when people do talk about these minnow nations and say, God, what a tough life always losing to England and Germany. How cool, though, also, on the other hand, that these people who are, to the rest of the world, like everyday people, are getting to play against some of the biggest players and clubs. And imagine if they got a win. That would be, the biggest moment in their history, wouldn't it?
That's verging on emergency pod territory for us, I think.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, it is. I dread to think of the emergency pods that could happen if they went on a run in this competition.
Yeah.
We'll be doing one every couple of days.
Yes, yeah. Let's move on to our second category then. That's curious qualifications. While there is only one representative from the entirety of the continent of Oceania, there are 4 from Brazil alone. Do you know why there are 4 representatives from Brazil, Paul?
Yeah, well, is it because they're the 4 winners of the Copa Libertadores, which has been dominated by Brazilian sides?
Yeah, absolutely. They are the 4 clubs have won the Copa Libertadores between 2021 and 2024, which is the 4-season qualifying period. So you've got Palmeiras, Flamengo, Fluminense, and Botafogo. In fact, I think it was 2017 or 2018 the last time a non-Brazilian club became champions of South America. That's an incredible dominance.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, you look at the names of these clubs. If you were just cherry picking the clubs you want to be involved in this competition, and you came to this region of the world, they would have to be in the conversation, right? These are massive football clubs with huge prestige and history. But what's interesting is that River Plate and Boca Juniors then get in, and I wonder if this was slightly a catch-all sort of safety net that they get in as best ranked eligible team in the 4-year rankings. And what it allows to happen is River Plate and Boca Juniors, 2, again, massive, huge clubs that if they weren't involved, it would seem really weird. Mm-hmm. That lets them in the door. So in a weird way, I think the system sort of does work. It would feel really weird if they weren't involved, some of these teams.
I was reading The View from South America in World Soccer Magazine, which was written by the excellent Tim Vickery. And he was saying, I didn't know this actually, the Copa Libertadores was created in 1960 with the explicit purpose of finding a champion to take on the best team from Europe. And I think that South American clubs have a bit of an inferiority complex vis-a-vis Europe. And so they take this tournament very seriously. And to give you an indication of how seriously they're taking it, they've actually carved out a month-long break in the Campeonato Brasileiro, the top flight league, to give the quartet of clubs representing them at the Club World Cup the best possible chance of success. Now that is a country taking it seriously.
It is, isn't it? And you're right, there's a real mentality thing here where when you come at something from a European point of view, this tournament has been sort of looked down upon, slightly sneered at, I think, by certain clubs and by certain fans. But it really is being taken very seriously by pretty much everyone outside of Europe. This is a really big deal. And these Brazilian sides will see this as an opportunity to go all the way and win this and prove a bit of a point, as you say.
Let's look at the European perspective now then, because you've got clubs from the likes of England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Portugal, the big footballing nations, and then Austria, Red Bull Salzburg. A real curious set of circumstances have come together to allow Salzburg to become the 12th European club to book their place at this tournament. I'll be flabbergasted if you know off the top of your head how they've managed it, Paul, but I will offer you the opportunity.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you, Lee. I was just going to say, Lee, why are they there?
Yeah.
I can't for the life of me get my head around it.
So you've got 12 representative clubs from UEFA, and there's a limit of 2 per country, which I think is a good thing, because when we talk about like the Champions League nowadays, and part of the reason I think you and I have fallen out of love with it is because you do see the same clubs from the same countries represented. And I think we sort of like to, or we wish it was still like the old days where you used to get like a Serbian club going really far or a Romanian club going really far. So I do like this particular rule. The way that those places are allocated are the 4 winners of the Champions League between 2021 and 24, and then the 8 best-ranked clubs. Now, because Real Madrid won the Champions League twice in that period, it therefore means that it's actually the 9th top-ranked clubs, because that extra place goes into the rankings. And then you have to go down the rankings, and they choose the teams, but they can only have a maximum of 2 per country, which meant that once they got to a certain place, then it was just clubs from the big leagues, and they had to skip over the likes of Liverpool, Barcelona, Napoli, until they found a club from another country, which was Austria, and that is how Red Bull Salzburg have managed to sneak in very much through the back door to this tournament and get a lot of, it's a lot of prize money. It's very lucrative to be in this competition.
And that's a really interesting technicality they've got in on. And also because it's a 4-year ranking, right? It's possible for a team like them who are, Red Bull Salzburg are on a slump, right? They were the dominant force in Austria, and as you've taught me, they're not anymore. They've had a terrible couple of years. So quite funny to see them in there as not even the champions of Austria.
Yeah, so they haven't won a trophy for the last 2 years now, which by their standards is a complete abomination. They almost finished in a Conference League spot this season, only getting into the Champions League in the last minute of the final day because their rivals Austria Vienna conceded a 92nd minute goal. So the fact that Red Bull Salzburg are there at all is quite crazy. The other club that we wanted to talk about in this curious qualifications category is LAFC, because until fairly recently, it was not known who the 32nd and final participant in the Club World Cup would be. That's because of multi-club ownership.
Yeah, and this was a pretty controversial one, was it not? I think Leon from Mexico were due to get in because they won the CONCACAF Champions League. But they're part of a group that also own a couple other clubs in the competition, is that right?
Yeah, it's Grupo Pachuca. They own both Pachuca and Club Leon. And a complaint was made by Alajuelense of Costa Rica because they felt that this was a contravention of ownership regulations. I think Alajuelense actually wanted that spot themselves. Ultimately, FIFA decided to allocate it in a different way. They decided that there would be a one-off playoff match between Los Angeles FC, who had been the runners-up behind disqualified Club Leon in the 2023 CONCACAF Champions Cup, and Club America, the next highest-ranked team in the CONCACAF Federation. And LAFC won that playoff match 2-1 in extra time. So there will be 3 US clubs at the tournament now.
But the thing that's weird to me, so 2 things that I find odd here. That this group owns 2 clubs within the Mexican top flight, right? That for me immediately seems odd. I can't think that happens in other countries that I know of. That in itself is kind of a strange situation. But there's also another thing that I find a bit odd, which is that in other competitions, it is possible to play against teams that are in the same ownership group, is it not? We've seen this happen before, I believe. So I find that strange that that's a rule in this competition, whereas it wouldn't be in, say, a UEFA competition.
But I think the rules are slowly changing, are they not? Because Crystal Palace might not be able to compete in the Europa League next season because
Ah,
of.
is that new? Have they just brought this in then?
I'm
Because I'm
not.
sure we've seen teams in the same
We
ownership
have,
group
yeah.
play.
We've
Yeah.
seen Red Bull Salzburg versus Red Bull Leipzig, but I think they might have done something to circumvent that. I'm not sure exactly what it was. But yeah, this is common practice, in fact, and so it means that unfortunately, Club Leon will miss out on the tournament and $9.55 million in participation fees alone, which is obviously a big blow. LAFC are at the tournament along with two other MLS clubs. The first one is Inter Miami. They were awarded the spot as there's a spot essentially for the host nation, and they were awarded that spot based on their performances in the 2024 regular season. They got a record 74 points and won the Supporters' Shield, and they are joined by Seattle Sounders as well. And that brings us on nicely to our third category, prize money protest, because the Seattle Sounders players are not happy with the distribution of the prize money for their involvement in this tournament, are they?
No, and they have made their protest very clear with these T-shirts. Have you seen the T-shirts they took to the field on which protest the prize money distribution? And they say Club World Cash Grab, I think they said on them.
Yep.
Which I feel like they've missed a pun somewhere. Like that just doesn't quite feel right. But they're brilliantly budget-looking shirts that they appropriately took to the field on to try and make their point, I suppose, that they don't feel the cash is being distributed fairly.
Yeah, I mean, you've got, again, it's the same figure for all clubs in CONCACAF. So $9.55 million goes to the Seattle Sounders. But there is a clause in the current MLS collective bargaining agreement which limits the players' share to 50% of prize money from external tournaments. And that's capped at $1 million per team. I really wasn't sure whether that would be a reasonable percentage or not, but it seems from digging into it a little bit deeper that the standard percentage across the board is quite a bit higher than that. And so they are now voicing their displeasure at that. They did that before the game against Minnesota United. American journalist Tom Bogert reported that the Sounders owner, Adrian Hanauer, was unaware this protest was going to take place and angrily addressed the players in the dressing room. Apparently, he was absolutely seething about the fact they didn't approach him directly with their concerns before making a public statement.
Yeah, and that was I saw that statement too, and it said he addressed the team in a profanity-laced speech, which I kind of wish I could see. But yeah, you would feel very angry as an owner that decision was taken without coming to you first, because obviously it looks very bad for the owner of the club that his players are protesting, especially a financial issue around the tournament that they clearly want to be part of. So yeah, I found that really interesting aspect of this protest was it was genuinely done in quite a kind of covert way, that it wasn't run by the club's hierarchy.
Let's look at the prize money more broadly, because it is a highly lucrative competition. In total, there will be $1 billion of prize money allocated to the clubs. $525 million of that is in participation fees, $475 million in performance bonuses. I think that for clubs outside of Europe, this is particularly important, isn't it? Because if you take the example of, let's say, Mamelodi Sundowns or Al Ahly, who are, competing for the African Champions League, their participation fee in the Club World Cup is again $9.55 million, whereas the whole prize money for winning the CAF Champions League is less than half of that. And you also have to factor into that the incredibly difficult travel arrangements that they have to make that take up a lot of that money as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you mentioned those two clubs, Al Ahly, Mamelodi Sundowns, who actually, it's a really big deal for these clubs. But what it can do is create even more of a disparity between the wealth of those clubs and the other clubs they're competing with in their domestic leagues. So both those clubs are powerhouses. Mamelodi Sundowns, as we mentioned on a previous pod, owned by one of the richest people in Africa and certainly one of the most influential people in Africa. Al Ahly, like an Egyptian institution, a massively powerful member-owned club. So they've already kind of got an advantage domestically, and they're both very powerful. And suddenly they get this additional windfall. My worry is, does it just exaggerate that disparity that's already there and just hand a massive bumper payday to the most powerful clubs. And as you say, it's not going to matter to the Europeans. These sums of money are not that important. But to other confederations, you do worry a bit. Is this just strengthening the strong, basically?
Well, I think that does apply to Austria because Red Bull Salzburg already are far richer than any of the other clubs in the league. So with the money that comes from this Club World Cup as well, I do think that could apply there too. Let's move on to our final category. It's bans and billboards. What I've got here, Paul, are 3 stories that we've previously discussed in passing, perhaps not in great detail on the pod, about 3 of the participating clubs. They are Flamengo, Palmeiras, and Wydad Casablanca. Which of those would you like us to do first?
Should we start with Wydad Casablanca?
Sure. They were founded, actually, initially as a water polo club back in 1937 that focused on giving indigenous Moroccans the right to access swimming pools, which is quite an interesting origin story. We talked about Wydad Casablanca shortly after our visit to Prague to see the Prague derby between Slavia Prague and Sparta Prague in the Czech Cup last year. Do you remember what that was about?
I don't, actually. I really don't. I'm trying to think of the clues in the title of the section, but no, I genuinely don't remember this.
It's to do with the fans and how good the fans are.
Well, I remember they have like some of the most passionate. They're famed for being some of the most heated and passionate fans in the world, aren't they? And that derby between Wydad and Raja Casablanca is often labelled as like the most heated game in world football. But I can't remember exactly what they'd done to get our interest.
So when we were talking to Slavia's Director of Communications, Jakub Splavec, he was saying very proudly that Slavia had the 6th best fans in world football according to the Ultras World magazine ranking. And so we then went and looked at the overall rankings to see who was, at the very top. And Wydad Casablanca apparently have the best ultras in world football, while Raja Casablanca, their city rivals, are 5th. So you say there it's one of the feistiest derbies. Well, they are apparently 2 of the very best fan groups in the world.
That's very interesting. I wonder how much of that will be on show at the Club World Cup. Like, I wonder how many of those fans are able to get out there. Can they afford it? Can they take the time off? Because it would be great if we get displays like all the fans coming from these clubs and showing their passionate fan cultures from around the world. But I just can't imagine how they could do it, really.
Let's look at the 2 Brazilian clubs then before we round off part 1. Flamengo. What did we talk about to do with Flamengo before? I think you might know this one.
I do. Flamengo, was it that they were initially a rowing club? Is that right?
Yes.
And I remember we told this story on the pod about a game. It was a derby game, I think. It must be against Fluminense then, I guess, where Fluminense were trying to waste time. I mean, we're going back now, a long time ago. Fluminense were trying to waste time and hold a lead. And so they kept booting the balls into the lake, which was like next to the pitch. But Flamengo had this trump card that they had a rowing team. So they were rowing, like every time a clearance was booted into the lake, their rowers were going out, getting the ball, putting it back on the field. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the 1941 Rio State Championship final. This we found this information on a Guardian piece, which was, I think, football's getting lost or something along those lines. But we stumbled upon that, and I think we did that a couple of years back. What's quite interesting is Flamengo and Fluminense are both Rio de Janeiro-based clubs. But did you know that they were originally the same club back in the day?
No, I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, Flamengo were born following a dispute between the players of fellow Club World Cup participant Fluminense in 1911. So there was a dispute, and some of those players then went on and formed Flamengo.
Wow. Yeah, there's a few of those in world football, I think, aren't there, where clubs have just had a kind of schism into 2. But I didn't know that was one of them. 2 massive, massive clubs.
The final one is Palmeiras. The clue is in the title of the category, bans and billboards. Do you remember this one?
No. God, my memory's not good today, is it? I don't remember this one.
This is about Leila Pereira, the Palmeiras president. She is, incidentally, the only female president of a participating club at the Club World Cup. We like to see that. We want to see more women take on, positions like that in football. She wasn't particularly interested in football as a youngster, but she fell in love with Palmeiras due to her football-loving husband, and is now, most of the time, affectionately referred to as Aunt Leila by the Palmeiras fans. But But a couple of years ago, they weren't very happy with her at the lack of new signings, and they decided to protest that by placing billboard advertising at Times Square in New York, where she was on holiday at the time. It said, "Where are our players? Keep your word and keep your promises."
Oh wow, that's got that. Imagine being on holiday and getting that.
Yeah.
I do vaguely remember that. The other thing I know about Palmeiras is that they have the pig as their mascot, do they not?
I didn't know that.
I think so. Like they adopted it relatively recently, like in the 80s. They adopted the pig as their mascot, and I don't know exactly the kind of the reasons for this, but there was a time when one of their I think it was a rival was sort of throwing the name at them, and they adopted it and ran with it. And one of their star players, like a real idol of his generation, was photographed for a famous press shoot with a pig in his lap.
Ah, I had no idea about that.
There you go.
Good fact. The reason, by the way, this category was called bans and billboards is because I forgot to mention in the Wydad Casablanca section that they've been operating under a transfer ban for most of this season. And so this specially created transfer window between the 1st and 10th of June, which has been set up by FIFA to allow participants in the Club World Cup to make some extra signings before the tournament, they can't be active in it, Wydad Casablanca.
That's tough. That definitely puts them at a disadvantage. That said, I looked at this and I was thinking, if you're really going to sign players at this point, trying to integrate them into your squad, you've really only got a matter of weeks and no real sort of solid competitive football to do that. So I was wondering how many clubs will actually, make use of that window.
You got anything else to add on the Club World Cup, Paul, or should we take a quick break?
No, I think that was a pretty good section. It's been nice to get my head around it a bit because it's been on the horizon for a while, but like I imagine a lot of our listeners, you don't necessarily know exactly what's going on and why. So it's nice to get a head around it.
Yep, and to tell everyone all about Auckland City and why they should be supporting them at the tournament. So we hope you enjoyed that preview. For more content on the Club World Cup, do follow us on Twitter, Instagram and TikTok at SweeperPod. And please subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Spotify, Apple or YouTube. We'll take a quick break now and return soon to talk all about the highlights from the international break. Welcome back to part 2 of The Sweeper, and for the eagle-eyed viewers watching along to the video version of this podcast on Spotify, X, YouTube or Facebook, wondering how I've managed to have a haircut in that 15-second musical break. Paul, we're actually recording part 2 3 days later because we wanted to see what happened in World Cup qualifying over the weekend, and it's a good thing we did too.
Yeah, it is. It's been a pretty dramatic few days, and it would have been a shame if we had to miss out on all that action for this pod.
Yes, just so I could have consistent hair between parts 1 and 2. We've got stuff from Europe. The Albania-Serbia match and Finland are on the agenda. In South America, Venezuela and Curacao. In Asia, Uzbekistan and Jordan. In Africa, Eritrea. So let's get cracking with Europe. And I think we've got to talk about this Albania-Serbia crunch clash that took place in UEFA World Cup qualifying. This is one of the fiercest rivalries in European football, largely due to historical and geopolitical tensions. Kosovo is the major flashpoint. It's UEFA's newest member state, isn't it? And it's largely inhabited by ethnic Albanians, but it used to be part of Serbia, who refuse to recognise it. And that has led to remarkable tensions in previous matches between the two countries. I'm thinking here, namely, of the 2014 Euro qualifier in Belgrade, which was abandoned. Do you remember the drone and the flag of Greater Albania?
Yeah, I do. And Serbia player snatching it down and effectively trying to stamp the flag down, and the brawl between the two teams, which I think resulted in pretty severe punishments for both, I think.
Yeah, so it was a mass brawl. The game got abandoned. Serbia were awarded the 3-0 win, but even they were also deducted 3 points and ordered to host 2 qualifiers behind closed doors. Both countries were fined €100,000, and I think ever since UEFA have had their fingers firmly crossed that they wouldn't face each other again. They have been drawn together in World Cup qualifying. And the first game in Tirana was pretty uneventful on the pitch. It ended 0-0. Albania did miss a penalty. But for all the lack of excitement on the pitch, there was plenty of tension off the pitch. Paul, did you see any of the stuff that sort of went along with this game on social media?
Well, I saw the amazing petty gesture of the tiny flag. Did you see this? That the Serbia flag was the smallest possible flag they could get away with hoisting.
Yeah. So for every match, the international matches, they have to have the flag of both countries. They usually have as well a flag of the Continental Confederation. They also had this time a World Cup qualifiers flag. And so you had 4 in a long line. You had a big Albania flag, a big UEFA flag, a big World Cup qualifier flag, and a tiny, tiny Serbia flag. And as you say, a remarkable gesture of pettiness.
Yeah, just I mean, you have to admire it in your own way. You have to admire it. Wasn't there also something with one of the mascots who did something like kind of inflammatory but very cheeky?
Yeah, so you know where when the two teams are standing out for the anthems, they have the children of the opposite country standing in front of them in one of those weird football traditions that I never quite understand. They had the Albanian children making the eagle symbol where they cross their wrists, and that is the national symbol of Albania. They did that right in front of the Serbian players.
Wow, I mean that's a gutsy thing to do for kids. You must have been what, like 10, younger than that? That's again, it shows just how deeply rooted this conflict is, doesn't it?
And there were even angry Albanians on social media who were lamenting the fact that one of their players stopped to help Dusan Vlahovic when he had cramp. You know, the whole holding the leg out stretch thing. Just don't. I think I saw someone that said, "Don't help that swine" or something like that. So it's very fierce. No surprises that no away fans were allowed for this game. So there were no Serbia fans. The Albania fans were angry because they had a lottery system for the home fans. And the reason for this, I think, was just to ensure that all the ultras and the people that might cause trouble weren't guaranteed to get into the stadium. But that caused a lot of anger among the Albanian fans because it was a pure lottery as to whether you could get in or not.
Yeah, but I can see the logic in that, can't you? I can understand what the thought process was. I mean, in honesty, for the organisers and probably for both FAs, this is just a game you want done and out the way. Especially, you know, not even just from a sort of security perspective, but from a footballing perspective. Both teams would be looking just avoid any fines, avoid any point deductions here, and just get through. So in a way, a 0-0 draw is probably not a bad outcome for everyone.
UEFA does have 6 banned international fixtures, pairings that simply can't happen. Surprisingly, Serbia-Albania is not one of them, but I suppose the list could just continue forever if you let it. Which are the 6 banned fixtures, Paul, to test your knowledge in European football?
Oh, Lee, that's a devilish test of mine. I can name a few. So Spain, Gibraltar, they can't play. Armenia, Azerbaijan can't play. And then it's Kosovo, like Kosovo, Serbia. But then I dry up a little bit because I actually would have thought Serbia, Albania would have been one. If you'd asked me this question without this context, I'd have said that was one of them.
Yeah, there are 3 banned fixtures involving Kosovo. They cannot face Serbia, Bosnia, or Russia, who of course cannot face Ukraine either. I really am surprised that Serbia or Albania isn't one of them because I'm not sure it would be that much harder to keep those two apart. If you've already got 6, would 7 be much of a game changer?
No, and you could argue it's actually more of a heated one than some of the other ones to some degree. It's at least as heated as Kosovo, Serbia. I know it sounds odd because the root of it is Kosovo, but I feel like the amount of anger and the ferocity of this derby, you know, surely is about as bad as that. So I wonder if they'll change that. I wonder if there's room to add. I mean, obviously there is room to add because Russia and Ukraine must be relatively recent. They've added that into the mix.
We're off to another story involving Serbia next, and that is a Serbia Women's Nations League game against Finland. Finland, though, are the focal point of our story here. What have Finland done to deserve a mention on the sweeper, Paul?
They've done one of the most sweeper things you can imagine, and they've accidentally called up a 51-year-old player.
Yes, they have. How did they manage this?
Well, to be fair, she has the same surname as the player they intended to call. So Finland wanted to call up their defender Nane Ruskanen, and instead put into the system Stina Ruskanen, who last played for Finland 29 years ago. The amazing thing is that, well, that this is possible. And so what happened, it wasn't noticed before it went through a deadline. So you can name a squad, you can make changes to it up to a certain deadline. They noticed it once it was too late. And so they just had to do without a fairly important defender for this game against Serbia.
And I presume the 51-year-old took her place on the pitch.
Well, she actually had she saw the funny side of it. She joked, "I'm definitely ready if the call comes. I was playing in a kick around yesterday, so my touch is pretty good." I would have brought her. Might as well have her on the bench, right?
Yeah. Or at least if your team's 4-0 up with a few minutes to go, actually bring her on.
Yeah, it ended 1-1, so they wouldn't have necessarily had the chance to do a great gag and bring her on. But the manager, I think, was very embarrassed, had to apologise about it. Funnily enough, said that Nane Ruskanen, the player who didn't get selected, who should have been, took the news remarkably well, which I'd be interested to know how she took it. But yeah, what a crazy mistake to make. It just shows that for all of the professionalisation of the game, there are still some elements that are as simple as someone typing something into a computer and just botching it.
It actually made me think of the story we talked about in Bulgaria a little while back, where there was a minute's silence for an ex-player who hadn't actually died. I guess it falls in that sort of blunders in football category, but it made me think of that one.
Yeah, well, this is a weird thing, right? I didn't really know this until we had this story, that it would seem to me it would be very odd if players could be physically present and in the squad, but not on a team sheet, if you see what I mean. You would have thought there's some sort of check they go through and just be like, well, okay, Ola, you're on here. But it doesn't seem like that happens. And when I was researching this, there's a story that Lucy Bronze had the same thing happen to her with England in a way, in that she believed she was on the team sheet, was ready to come on, got warming up, and it was then that they realised she wasn't listed. So she had to just sit back down for this game against Switzerland in December 2024, so pretty recently. And the same thing had happened in the Men's Nations League for Poland last year when Karol Swiderski was brought and thought he was about to come on. They, again, took the change to the fourth official who said, he's not on your team sheet. And they lost 5-1 in that game. He had to just, again, sit down. That was even worse because he travelled all the way from the USA to just be part of this game, and they'd lost 5-1. So the whole thing added together. I can imagine the mood on the team bus going back after that one. But I just couldn't quite believe that this is a thing, that you can have a player that they don't realise until literally the moment they're telling the fourth official, they don't realise they're not on the sheet.
Where are we going next, Paul? South America, Asia, or Africa?
I think we should go to Asia because there was some brilliant drama in Asia, wasn't there?
Yeah. Before we do go over to Asia, though, a reminder, you can join our Patreon page at patreon.com/sweeperpod for £5 a month or whatever that is in your local currency for weekly episodes of The Sweeper and plenty more written bonus content besides. It's super easy to sign up. There's no minimum stay. You can just sign up, try it out and stay as long as you want. Making this podcast, Paul, with all the research that goes into it, is a tough task for our two-man team, isn't it? And we really, really do depend on Patreon contributions.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a lot of hours. You know, our area of focus is the entire world. So by nature, you know, we can't be experts on all of that. We have to research every single story. We have to do quite a big job for each podcast to get it ready. And yeah, it really is only possible because people support us on Patreon.
Yes, we already have over 350 paid supporters. We're very grateful to each and every one of them. So if you like what you hear and you do want to support us, do try us out on Patreon at patreon.com/sweeperpod. But let's head on over to Asia now then, Paul, because we've got two new countries at the World Cup. Two debutants, no less. Uzbekistan and Jordan have both secured their first ever World Cup finals appearance. I guess we should talk about Uzbekistan first. And I think the reason for doing that is A, chronologically they secured their place before Jordan, but B, they have a long history of World Cup failures and sort of narrow misses where they looked like they were gonna qualify for the tournament and then didn't manage to be able to. They drew away to UAE, didn't they, to get over the line?
They did. They just needed a draw in this game, and it was really tense, let me tell you. Their keeper had to make a series of amazing saves to keep it to 0-0. And I think you could almost feel the relief more than anything else when they qualified because of, as you say, this history of being the nearly men. A couple of times, really, the qualification campaigns petering out in a way that is almost unbelievable, really, that they'd looked, every bit on the way to the World Cup and then just bizarre things had got in their way. So I think in a way they just needed to get this one done rather than let it go any further and let those nerves really sink in and this sense that, God, what if we're cursed?
Producer Tom made a great explainer video about Uzbekistan's series of failures. In 2014, he told us that they finished 1 goal behind South Korea in the playoff position and then lost 9-8 to Jordan in the playoff itself on penalties. But in 2006, and this is bizarre, I never knew about this, Uzbekistan played a 2-legged playoff against Bahrain to get through then to the Intercontinental playoff against Trinidad and Tobago. Well, that's who they would have faced if they'd got through. In the first leg, Uzbekistan were 1-0 up and then they scored a penalty in the 39th minute. But referee Toshimitsu Yoshida disallowed the goal due to encroachment and awarded an indirect free kick to Bahrain rather than ordering a retake, which is what the laws of the game require. Uzbekistan protested, initially seeking to be awarded a 3-0 forfeit, but instead FIFA declared the match null and void and ordered a full replay. That rematch ended 1-1, the return leg was 0-0, and Uzbekistan lost on away goals.
I've never heard of anything like this, right? I mean, talk about it backfiring on you. That appeal could not have backfired worse, could it really? So I think by rights they could consider themselves to be one of the unluckiest teams to be knocked out of that World Cup, really.
They've got a good generation of players now, though, who have been making waves at youth level for quite some years. So it's great to see that they've managed to fulfil their potential and they will be at the tournament next summer. I didn't know, Paul, they are the first Central Asian nation to qualify for the World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, that would sort of make sense. I'm trying to think who else would be counted as a Central Asian nation. Obviously, you have a lot of stands in that region.
Yeah.
I guess, in a way, I'm not as surprised by that as a stat, but yeah, I mean, your stat was even better. First double landlocked nation to qualify for a finals tournament.
Yeah, I mean, there are only 2 in the world, and let's face it, I don't think Liechtenstein will be at the World Cup anytime soon, unless they quadruple its size to like 192 teams. And yet, when I posted a picture of the map on Twitter to say they were the first double landlocked country to qualify, we had people saying, but there's a sea there, but it is the Caspian Sea, which is the world's largest inland body of water. It's a lake, it's not a sea.
Yeah.
So that's how Uzbekistan,
confusing marketingly.
Yeah, agreed.
Seems to be like, you can't really just call your lake a sea. But anyway, that's probably for a different pod.
Yeah, certainly. Jordan also qualified for their first ever World Cup. Thanks to Iraq losing 2-0 to group leaders South Korea. I was quite proud of the pun I posted on Twitter here, Paul. Iraq had a player sent off and I tweeted that they had gone a man down, spell A-M-M-A-N, a joke for the capital city fans out there.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good. I mean, I suppose Jordan, of course, beat Oman 3-0, but they didn't go Oman down. Oh, God. We could be doing this all day.
We certainly could, yeah. Let's not. Don't Jordan and Iraq have some beef as well?
They very much do, and beef's a good word for it, though. I don't know if beef's involved, but basically you might remember this game in the Asia Cup. So in the Asia Cup 2023, Jordan had an amazing competition. They actually got to the final. They knocked South Korea out on the way. And this was maybe one of the indicators they were going to do well in World Cup qualification was, this tournament. But during the tournament, there was this remarkable game against Iraq. And what happened here was that when Jordan went ahead 1-0 up, their goal scorer simulated the eating of their national dish. They all sat around in this kind of circle and pretended to eat their national dish. Iraq battled back, got it back to 1-1, and then went 2-1 ahead. their goal scorer, Ayman Hussein, chose to mock Jordan's celebration by effectively setting up the same scene, but in a sort of derisory way, mocking the eating of the Jordanian dish. He was sent off for that. The referee obviously felt it was inflammatory enough to send him off. And Jordan had the last laugh because they then went on to win 3-2. So it's interesting with these two teams were battling it out for this place. And had the results not gone this way, they are due to meet in the final game. And it would have been a very, very feisty atmosphere. So Jordan again get the last laugh on Iraq.
Wasn't it the Iraqi player that celebrated? Didn't he mimic the eating with the wrong hands? Isn't that that's quite insulting, I think?
Yeah, I heard people say that. I remember we looked at the pictures at the time. There were even people saying that he maybe had his other hand on his crotch. But I mean, honestly, I don't totally remember the ins and outs. But it was clearly a mocking gesture. You know, he mocked the same celebration that the opponents had done. But to be sent off did seem very harsh, and it absolutely turned the game on that day. So these two teams have absolutely no fondness for each other, and Jordan will be delighted to take that spot and leave Iraq with the really difficult task of battling through now if they can get through this playoff system that now presents more opportunities to get into the intercontinental playoffs, etc.
There's been a lot of criticism about the expanded 48-team World Cup, but how great is it to see debutants already booking their places at the finals? We love that, don't we?
We absolutely love it, and it opened the door to a load of nations that were just never quite necessarily gonna get there, and it's really exciting. We're a minnow podcast. We're bound to say this, but it means something so special to qualify for a World Cup. It's the biggest thing that can happen to your nation, and it can also have an impact for generations to come, seeing your players play in a World Cup. So opening that up to this new raft of countries just seems like a really positive thing.
Over in South America, Venezuela beat Bolivia 2-0 on home turf in a crucial South American crunch clash. This game involved one of the weirdest and most terrible yet brilliant own goals you'll see in international football. Did you see it, Paul?
Yeah, I did. It's very early on in the game, wasn't it? It was about only a few minutes in. And it's from some distance, isn't it? It's sort of a miscommunication. The keeper's obviously not expecting it, and he just sends it back in from, I think, about 30 yards or something, isn't it?
It might even be more. Yeah, the defender, Hector Cuellar, passed the ball back to his goalkeeper, but it bounced a bit, and the goalkeeper put his foot down to control it, but it went right under his foot and into the net. It wasn't that far from the halfway line. It was really quite something. And Bolivia really needed to get a result in this game, and they really struggle away. And you can just imagine the coach in the changing rooms beforehand. Keep it tight for the first 5 minutes. Don't do anything stupid. And then he sees his defender score from almost the halfway line in his own net.
Yeah, and I mean, as the goalkeeper, you must be thinking as well, like, he's not gonna launch back from there. Oh, no. I mean, no goalkeeper wants a ball launched back at them from 35, 40 yards back, do they? It's an absolute hospital pass. And, okay, he makes a real mess of it, but he must have thought, why do that?
Yeah, I mean, even at youth football, I was taught, like, if you pass it back to your goalkeeper, do it to the side of the goal.
Yeah.
Or at an angle so that it can't then go in the goal. So, yeah, remarkable to see that happen in international football. The ramifications are that Venezuela are now 4 points clear in 7th position. That's the intercontinental playoff place with 3 rounds of games to go. And that is great because Venezuela not only have never qualified for the World Cup, they are the only South American country in CONMEBOL that has never previously appeared at a World Cup finals. And I suppose this is just an extension of the previous topic, right, with Uzbekistan and Jordan getting there. But we could see Venezuela at the World Cup next year, but potentially not their fans, because Donald Trump and the US administration have implemented a travel ban, full or partial, depending on the country in question. There's 19 countries affected by this. I think Venezuela have a partial ban. Athletes have an exemption, so whatever happens, if Venezuela qualify, they will go to the USA, but their fans may not. And that is quite heartbreaking when you consider this would be their first ever appearance.
Yeah, it can't. It's simply put, it cannot be allowed to happen. Like this cannot be allowed to happen. And I don't know the ins and outs of this, but I thought that when you agree to host a World Cup, part of that deal is that you don't have travel bans in place on participating nations. Now, I'm not totally sure what that looks like. I know obviously North Korea has gone to World Cups before. I suppose technically they are banned by their own government from travelling rather than by the incoming country. But I just didn't think you're allowed to host a World Cup if you're saying X number of the nations can't bring players. I really hope it's solved, because it would be a tragedy. Especially Venezuela, such an amazing history of football, such a passionate fan base. For them to finally make it to the biggest stage and not be allowed to be there would just be a travesty.
I think we're getting a foretaste of this right now as well, because the Gold Cup, that's the CONCACAF tournament, is taking place in the States at the moment, or it's about to take place, I think, starting in a week or so's time. And Haiti are one of the countries with a full travel ban, which means their team can go, but any Haiti-based fans cannot go. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds, and if that leads to a solution being worked out before the World Cup next year, which you would sincerely hope for. Another talking point, I think, for this Venezuela-Bolivia match is that after the game, which took place at 6 o'clock in the afternoon local time, Bolivia wanted to depart immediately. They have another qualifier against Chile that's coming up on Tuesday, so that's tomorrow for us. For anyone else that's listening, you'll already know what the score of that game was. The authorities prevented their charter flight from leaving, giving no reason. All the documents were in order, and that led to the players and staff being forced to return to their hotel in the middle of the night. They were not allowed to leave until noon the next day.
I mean, is this yet another of these international football sort of gamesmanship gestures that we've seen? You know, we've talked about quite a few African games lately where teams have just been treated really poorly at the airport. We also heard about teams in the AFC Challenge League and the way they were treated in Turkmenistan, allegedly. But it does feel a lot like that, doesn't it? Trying to reduce their rest time, trying to make their journey as uncomfortable as possible. Just sits really badly with me. I hate stuff like that. It just feels so much out of the spirit of the game. You know, everyone's out there to win. Everyone's, you know, out there for their nations to get to a World Cup, but it just shouldn't be allowed to do that kind of stuff.
Sadly, this kind of behaviour is apparently routine under the dictator Nicolas Maduro, who has a very authoritarian regime in Venezuela. They apparently regularly do this for visiting delegations. And Bolivia were absolutely not surprised that it happened.
So maybe, is it not a football thing then? Is it just, this is just the way people are, it's maybe not as thought through as being a football related gesture?
Yeah, I mean, it could be as well, just to disrupt the next qualifier, but who knows, frankly, Paul. Meanwhile, 65 kilometres across the water from Venezuela is the Dutch overseas territory of Curacao. What's happened to Curacao in this World Cup qualifying campaign, Paul?
Well, they've got off to an absolute flying start. They are into the final round of CONCACAF qualification for the first time. I think we've been talking about the expanded competition and what this means, this knock-on effect. Well, the expanded competition, and then you look at the fact the USA, Canada and Mexico are all hosting, it just creates in CONCACAF a completely different look to qualification. And one of the teams that could benefit are Curacao.
And what is unique about Curacao? What would make them unique if they were to qualify for the World Cup?
Well, they would be the smallest nation to ever qualify for a World Cup. At the moment, the smallest nation to qualify for a World Cup is Iceland, who have just under 400,000 people. Curacao has just 147,000, so it's much, much smaller. This would be an enormous achievement for what is, you know, a really, really small place.
Yeah, and as far as I could tell, they will be only the second overseas territory to qualify for a World Cup if they do. Obviously, bearing in mind they still have another group phase to get through. But I think the last one was the Dutch East Indies in 1938. That's now Indonesia. But I couldn't find any other examples of overseas territories that have qualified for a World Cup since.
Yeah, I think you're correct on that. The history of Curaçao's football is interesting because they were part of the Netherlands Antilles. Now, I don't know if you remember, like growing up, you'd hear about the Netherlands Antilles. I didn't really know what that was. But the Netherlands Antilles were effectively this group of the Dutch territories in the Caribbean, which was Saba, Sint Eustatius, Sint Maarten, Aruba, Curaçao, and Bonaire. So it was this whole lot grouped together. But when they broke up and became sort of individual teams, Curaçao was able to keep the footballing history of the Netherlands Antilles. So they are seen as the successor to that team. And in reality, what the Netherlands Antilles team mostly was Curacao, Bonaire, and initially Aruba. But Aruba then moved away in about 1986. So it's fair enough that they continue to have that name, but it is interesting that their football history is sort of broken into this original time when they were Curacao, the territory of Curacao, then the Netherlands Antilles, and then back to being Curacao again.
And who is their coach, Paul?
Their coach is Dick Advocat, who I think a lot of people remember, experienced Dutch boss. He's managed everywhere, Iraq, Serbia, Russia, South Korea, UAE. He's one of those guys who has been everywhere. And Curacao, unsurprisingly, don't struggle to attract Dutch coaches because, being a Dutch territory, it makes sense that they've got this footballing pedigree in Holland that they can send a coach over. But it's also a very attractive role. So, it's a lovely place to be. It's a very up-and-coming football nation. So they've had in the past, Hus Hiddink, Patrick Kluivert have been in as manager. So it's a really up-and-coming and exciting place to be at the moment, I think, Curacao in football terms.
Let's finish off the podcast today then with Eritrea. We're running out of time a little bit, so let's do this as speedily as we can. Eritrea have finally returned to international football after a 5-year absence.
They have, and this is great, obviously. There are a couple of little caveats here. So they hosted a tournament in the capital, Asmara, which is to celebrate the anniversary of Eritrea's independence. And they were supposed to play Niger and South Sudan. South Sudan pulled out, and so they played Niger's team twice. It was a domestic-based Niger side who are preparing for the Chan African Nations Tournament, which we've spoken about before, which is for players that play in their domestic leagues. It's taking place in August. The other point that's worth noting is, so Eritrea pulled out of the World Cup qualification, and Eritrea has basically pulled out of fixtures where they fear players will abscond. So the fact this was at home meant that wasn't possible. The other thing is that this was an entirely domestic-based squad for Eritrea. They have a couple of players, notably Ali Suleiman, who we talked about once joining a club in Sweden, and they did not come back, the overseas players. So there's a lot to like here. It's a really positive step. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be seeing Eritrea in qualification campaigns for AFCON or the World Cup anytime soon.
Would you say that this doesn't really then mark a major turning point in terms of the government and their attitude towards the national team, given that this was on home turf? We're not suddenly going to start seeing Eritrea fulfilling AFCON qualifiers or something like that?
I suspect not. I really hope I'm wrong, but, as we've spoken about, Eritrea's regime is notoriously oppressive. It's the UN has reported serious concern over human rights in the country. In the past, players have frequently absconded when they've gone on international duty. As recently as 2021, a lot of the under-20 squad, under-20 women's squad, went into hiding in Uganda. Botswana granted asylum to 10 members of the squad in the 2018 World Cup qualifiers. So I think it's unlikely that things will change when there are away games, but at least, if nothing else, football is returning, and people in Eritrea were able to watch their team, who performed really well. They drew 0-0 and they lost 1-0, but Niger are a very talented side, so it's at least a positive on that side.
Final question then. Because Eritrea hadn't played for more than 4 years, they were deemed inactive by FIFA, and so were just unranked in the FIFA ranking list. So you literally had all the way down to the bottom, San Marino 210, and then Eritrea 211th unranked. Now that they've played in this game, is that enough to put them back on the rankings?
See, I don't actually know, because I don't think these are counted as official competitive games, partly because I think Niger sent what was effectively labelled as a sort of A side. It's not their main side. They sent a sort of, or B team, they sent a representative team. I'm not certain these will count. The interesting other side note is people often say, well, when they come back, does that mean San Marino are finally off the bottom? But no, because of this weirdness that you just pick up the ranking points you had before. So we saw this with American Samoa. They went inactive, I think, for not playing for a really long period. They went back into action and immediately parachuted above San Marino, despite the fact they lost all the games they played, because they just pick up their ranking points from before.
Did not know that. If anyone does know, what happens to Eritrea in the FIFA rankings, feel free to let us know at sweeperpod@gmail.com. I think that is about it for today's pod, Paul. It's been quite a long one, what with the Club World Cup and the FIFA World Cup qualifying action as well. Do remember, listeners and viewers, to follow us on social media at SweeperPod, especially on Instagram, YouTube as well. We're making lots of short videos now on topics like why did Venezuela not let Bolivia leave the country, and what kind of qualifying misfortune did Uzbekistan have to go through before they eventually booked their place at the final. So lots of short little explainers about very sweeperish topics. And of course, don't forget the Patreon will have a bonus podcast on Wednesday, the 18th of June. So you can sign up for that at patreon.com/sweeperpod. Otherwise, we'll see you for another main pod on Wednesday, the 25th of June.